Okay, we're now live.
Okay, that's great. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. We certainly got around 100 people who registered for this event, so welcome to you all. We're really excited to be here. We've got a fantastic panel for you. So we're each going to take it in turn and say a few words of introduction, and some of us have got presentations, and then we're going to have some questions to the panel, and we're also going to be checking the chat feature and making sure that we can ask the questions that you're putting in the chat feature. So if you want to do that, please go ahead, and we'll be finishing off with your questions. So my name's Rosalind Calderley and I work for Sustrans, and I'm just going to share my presentation. Hopefully everybody can see that. So Sustrans are famous for the National Cycle Network. We've got over 12,000 miles of cycling and walking routes across the UK, including the Transpennine Trail, the Fallowfield Loop Line, and many others locally. So we're working to create livable cities and towns where it's possible to walk or cycle to shops and services within 20 minutes of residential areas. And this webinar is part of our work to promote the Bike Life Report, the UK's largest assessment of cycling in cities and towns. The 2019 report covered 17 cities and towns, including Manchester, and all of the reports are available on our website. It's a respected data source to highlight the needs for long-term planning for provision for cyclists. And importantly, this survey doesn't just ask those who already cycle, it's representative of all residents. And the survey in Greater Manchester was 1,500 residents. So it reflects the views and desires of your employees and your customers, both existing and potential across the region. So what do people want in Greater Manchester? Well, they tell us that they want more walking and cycling on the high streets. So 3/4 of residents think space should be increased for people socialising, cycling and walking on their local high streets. And we know that most residents support cycling. 67% of residents support building more cycle tracks, even if it means taking space away from cars. So moving away from that car-dominated environment is really important for business. Transport for London found that those who walk on a high street spend 40% more than those who drive. And in Dundee, a pilot project carried out in July 2020 was widely welcomed by traders and shoppers, with 62% saying it was good for their business and 84% of businesses reporting the changes as positive for the street. So local traders sometimes fear that building cycle lanes or restricting car parking or motor vehicle access will damage business, but the evidence shows that retailers overestimate how many of their customers travel by car. Shop vacancy rates are 5 times higher on streets with high levels of traffic, and retail turnover in pedestrianised areas generally outperforms non-pedestrianised areas. So the evidence shows that decisions need to be made by engaging with communities, both businesses and residents, and using the evidence that allows us to develop projects that support businesses. And we need to remember that this picture really is what customers, employees want to see happening on our high streets. Now over to Chris.
You caught me out there with that quick transition. Over to Chris. Right. Okay. Well, I'm glad that we've got a lot to get through. So great brevity, bang on time from the word go. I wanted to start really by just going backwards. Really, so much has changed since I took this job on nearly 3 years ago now. Back then, we started by looking at transport habits and how they were impacting our life, and it very quickly became clear that our roads and streets had quietly morphed, if you like, into something that wasn't people friendly, and we're enduring streets rather than enjoying them. And the changes we kind of insidiously coaxed us back into cars, which sounds a bit melodramatic, but actually government's own figures, and you can go and check this for yourself, there's a nice live tool, shows that in the last 10 years, driving in Greater Manchester around homes and neighbourhoods, so on those kinds of streets, has increased more than 40%. That's an extra 1.7 billion miles being driven outside of your front doors in just 10 years. No consultation, no fuss, but that has actually happened. And when you roll together all the health, safety, congestion, and air pollution costs of keeping it like that, the status quo, if you like, the question that's never asked, it comes to a staggering 3.7 billion pounds a year. So that's really, in a nutshell, why we conceived the Bee Network, to connect all of the places that we want to travel to with safe, protected space, because if people don't have space, they won't do it, and provide that essential alternative to driving that we obviously desperately need. And not to mention making nicer places to live, by the by. So that's really why I'm here. That's where it all started. And then the pandemic hit. Over the last year, I think it's fair to say we've probably all experienced some heartache, worry, bewilderment, and loss. I personally lost my father-in-law and a close friend in just the last 2 weeks because of COVID. And of course, businesses' livelihoods have been threatened and in some cases lost too. And we all emotionally rinsed out. But I think we also saw things, as you often do when there's adversity, that were also quite inspiring. And I think if 2020 taught us anything that we need to hang on to, it's how fast we can change when we need to in a crisis. What's really valued by us and what's robust when it really gets difficult. And I can say categorically that cycling and walking thrived in these circumstances in all of those categories. And whether because of good weather, bored kids for health, to get to work instead of crowding on a tram or a train, whatever the reason, across the region, people took to two wheels in their droves. 40% up on pre-COVID levels, cycling in particular, routinely, week in, week out. And that's been maintained when other modes have dropped between 60 and 90%. So if people feel safe, they will do it, and they did. So many local businesses actively adapted to the conditions. The Unicorn Groceries in Chorlton was one of them, and they found that where they had vulnerable customers who were shielding, they were unable to get to the store. So they set up a partnership with Chorlton Bike Deliveries to deliver shopping. Now, that was good for the community, but I think it's reasonable to say, or to recognise also, that there's some strong customer loyalty built there that's almost certainly going to last long after COVID has been beaten. And other businesses followed suit and started to do the same thing, and it quickly grew. And that bike delivery firm that started with just 5 members expanded to train 36 people in a matter of months. And it's a similar story across the country. So further afield, in places like Jesmond High Street in Newcastle, or Walthamstow in London, we keep hearing about places that had already reshaped the roads and their public spaces to prioritise people over cars, experienced the least disruption as COVID rebalanced the economy, and everyone was suddenly staying local and travelling under their own steam. And it mirrors what was already happening, where walking and cycling has been prioritised around shops and retail outlets. Spend routinely goes up by about 30%. And in the last year, the places that have had easy access by bike and on foot, they proved to be the most resilient. In fact, pandemic aside, cycle parking is proven, and we keep using the words proof and evidence, but it's all there. We just need to hear it. It's proven to deliver 5 times the retail spend per square metre than the same amount of car parking. Now, all of this signposts for me that where our future lies, and it confirms that we were already on the right track regarding active travel, that prioritisation of people is good for local communities and businesses. Now, the Bike Life report, the reason we're all sitting here, as ever, because I've seen a few of these now, confirms the vast majority of people want these changes. And I think after the collective experience that we've just had, I think if that report was commissioned now, those amazing figures of 74, 75%, I'd be willing to bet they'd be even more impressive. So all that evidence says that businesses thrive where cycling and walking are high. So it's my hope that high streets in our region and across the country, actually, because they're often the heart of communities, will actively help us build that sustainable future. Okay, that's my bit of soapbox. I'm going to step down now because you can see we've got panel the heart of organic here, and I'm going to bring them in and I'll let them introduce themselves really. So I'm going to start with Jessica Bowles, who's the Director of Strategy at Bruntwood. Now, Jessica, I guess you lease a lot of space to businesses, so is a less car-centric population going to help or hinder you?
Thanks, Chris, and thanks for the introduction. Yeah, I'm Jessica Bowles. I'm the Strategy Director at Bruntwood, and as Chris says, we lease all kinds of space to a whole range of different types of businesses. Many of those are in the city centre. Some are in across Greater Manchester, and we have some sites like Alderley Park in Cheshire or Booths Park in Knutsford that are a bit further afield. And I think what we see is some changing habits over time, and the pandemic has raised this question even further and accelerated that trend. But there is an increasing trend and requirement from our customers to have space, for secure space for bike storage, but more importantly, or as importantly, space for people to change, to get dressed, to have lockers where they can leave things, so that you haven't got your smelly bike kit on the back of your chair, or having to spend your day in it. So we're seeing some changing behaviour and some changing requirements really from our customer base that's been growing over the last few years, and we can talk a little bit about this in the questions. But as we redevelop our buildings and improve our buildings, we're building in significantly more and better quality shower facilities, changing facilities, locker facilities, and also bike storage, because I think that the infrastructure is a massive part of the challenge, and the safety and security of people while they're cycling, but people also want to know what they're going to do at the other end. And I think there's a role for businesses, office providers, educational institutions to be playing their part in making that possible, so the end of the journey isn't a headache.
Thank you for that. God, it just raised so many questions. I'd like to dive in there, but I'm not going to. John Wilkin is here now. He owns a cafe in the centre of the city region. Now, John, I imagine it's changed quite a lot for you in the last year.
Yeah, well, yeah, thanks for having me, Chris. It's certainly been a challenge for all industries, but hospitality in particular, as everyone's acutely aware, has been massively affected. And I'm talking to you from our bakery today. There's some produce here that I certainly didn't bake, Chris, but I've got a talented group of bakers who, through the virus, we pivoted and changed what we do from just being a restaurant operation to be a wholesale bakery. And it's been an incredibly challenging period. But I think what's maybe underdocumented is how much of an opportunity it was to stop and think about things in life. And we're talking about the provision of cycling routes in Manchester. Well, maybe the virus and what's happened has been a chance for us all to stop, pause, think and improve. And certainly for me as a business owner, one of our main sites is right next to Deansgate that went through a sample process of being closed down for cyclists. And it blew my mind, just the change in anxiety levels I felt as a pedestrian without cars being around. And just to take you back to my former life, Chris, I was a professional rugby player for 16 seasons and had the privilege to travel around the world. I spent 2 years living in Toronto, which is a city that embraces cycling as part of its everyday habit. And such a cycling-friendly city was just a real privilege to be around. But food and drink is my passion. I was a farmer as a young kid, and then I've made my way into food and drink in the city. And although it's been an incredibly challenging period for food and drink, it's certainly one that I think is exciting and full of optimism. And with regards to actually you know, the Deansgate closure and opening that up to cyclists. Just the evidence there for me, like I said, one of the big things was the anxiety of pedestrians. I think we underestimate that walking footfall, how anxious you are, even if you're on a pavement and there's cars traveling at speed, there's an element of anxiety. So fully pedestrianised areas and cycle-friendly areas, I think, are a really beautiful way to just calm that anxiety of city centre footfall. It brought more footfall to the area. And I think as Rosalind rightly said in her presentation, the dwell time of customers around our businesses increased. And I sort of got stopped on the street to talk about this by the guys behind this programme, and it was something that I was really passionate about. You know, I've travelled to Copenhagen, to Amsterdam, into Australia with sport, and my wife, she's a 3-time Olympian, she went around the world, you know, visiting amazing cities that really embraced pedestrians and cyclists. And it just frustrates me that we pit forms of transport against each other. So pedestrians are opposed to cyclists, cyclists and cars are at loggerheads, vans are at loggerheads with cars. Like, at the end of the day, I believe there just needs to be a joined up approach to making our roads safer, making them more cycle friendly. And as a small business owner in the city, I'm really excited about the potential development of cycle-friendly routes in Manchester.
So a rebalancing, I think, is what we're talking about. Again, lots of sub-questions, and I can see them actually. I can just see people in the chat there, because I think that's key, isn't it? Integration of all the modes, and it's just a rebalancing. I don't think anybody is going to see the end of the car, well, probably in our lifetimes, and probably don't need. But I'm going to move on to now. Of course, people live around these centres as well. So, Sarah, can I bring you in to give your perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm from Great Places Housing Group. Thank you very much for having us today. We've got 25,000 homes across the Northwest that we're responsible for. We're also a very large developer. We're building nearly 1,000 homes every single year. We want those homes to be places where people want to live. Just before I came on, I checked our design guide, and the first thing we have to do is look at the site. The second thing we have to do is look at accessibility. And so it's really, really interesting to actually think about those future homes. I do have a couple of slides, if you're okay for me to share them, just about our colleagues, because we've got over 700 colleagues coming into the workplace, and their pictures tell a much better story than I ever could. If you can just bear with me 1 second. This will work, won't it? So our staff, sorry, can you see that okay?
Yeah.
Perfect. So we take part in, so as an organisation, we take part in Love to Ride September every single year. So I'm ignoring COVID. 2020 doesn't exist as a year for me. This is from 2019 results, although we did, of course, win Love to Ride September 2020, but more on that later. But the staff stories coming back and saying, whenever they've tried to cycle in, so we have competitions, can you cycle in on this day? Can you cycle in every day? Can you walk in? Can you scoot in? But the staff stories was really, really important to us. And this is just some of the feedback we've received. Again, this is one of my lovely ones. So a colleague who'd recently started with Great Places had said, she was driving in every single day, and then she took part to sort of go, actually, I'll try cycling. And she suddenly found, she'd been a lifelong Mancunian, and suddenly found places of green space which she'd never been to before. And then all of a sudden she's on her bike, and then she said she was cycling along, and she thought, well, there's a path goes off that way. I'll see where it goes. And all of a sudden she's finding new routes. And she was also saying, about the positivity of having that experience of being able to see the green space on her way in. So this is part of her route on the way in. We also got some comedy gold feedback of people just like going, if they hadn't cycled in, this is where they'd be. In fact, he even pointed out which car would be his at precisely 5:20 on the M60. So we really were getting, as a business, we get really, really positive feedback from our staff whenever they do participate in activities. We also do like Clean Air Day and other things as well, but Love to Ride September has a really positive impact on us. For new developments then, I have touched on the fact that it's part of our design guide is to look at accessibility, but this is a really interesting one. We like to partner as much as possible because we're saying we can't do this by ourselves. So this is one of our new developments currently on site being built as I speak. And it's around Carswell over in Prestwich. The red line there, that shows the space that was going to be part of people's rear gardens. Transport for Greater Manchester came and said, oh, hang on, we've got the B network coming in the future. Can we link up with the cycle network? And we're like going, oh, that's actually going to be advantageous for our customers living in those homes. So we've donated that land back. So for us, if we hadn't had that contact, we'd have put gardens there. But actually, this is a really, really positive step for businesses to work together to plan the future together. That's my very quick intro.
That sounds dangerously like joined up thinking there. Which we need to be careful of that. While we're not looking. That's brilliant, and some more I think touching on planning and where people live in a moment with a couple of questions to follow. But last, but very much not least, because of course in all the changing landscape, all of these businesses still have to get supplies. And one of the companies that does that, already a well-established part of the Manchester scene, is Manchester Bike Hire. And Richard Armitage is here, the director of that firm. And I'd imagine quite a regional centre would be music to your ears, Richard. You're not music to our ears because you're muted.
Mute. Oh, yeah, it certainly would be. And in fact, we're located on Chapel Street in Salford, and Salford Council are doing some fantastic stuff on cycle routes. They really are way ahead of the game, I think, in Manchester, and to be congratulated. And we're already seeing the benefits of that. I've got a couple of slides. I've sworn blind I'll stick to 3 minutes. Is that all right?
Yep.
Here we go. So Manchester Bike Hire started in 2014, and Pavel Gajdosz was our founding director. And we immediately realized that bikes for business was where we wanted to be. But initially we started with traditional back to base bike hire. You buy a bike from our premises and you bring it back afterwards. A wide range of bikes, that was quite unusual. During COVID, however, we had to pivot. We had to switch, just like John. And we've gone for staff e-bike rental scheme with some really good pioneers. Northern Care Alliance, which is a collection of North Manchester NHS hospitals, Salford University, and we've got some more to announce shortly elsewhere in Manchester, where the members of staff can get an e-bike to try out for 4 weeks, rent-free, no obligation. And it has just completely changed the game for rows and rows of staff. Some of them have ended up getting out of the shed their old bike and doing it up, because the e-bike has reminded them that actually they do like cycling. Some of them have gone and bought an e-bike, and some people have just stuck with renting, and some have handed it back and said, no, actually it's not for me at this time. But that's great, they've found out. We actually have had trouble sourcing e-bikes now for the future schemes, which is what's holding them up. So there's an interesting question. We're cargo bike specialists, and we have the largest try before you buy cargo bike fleet in the region. So it's sort of wide range of designs and price points, whether they're electric or non-electric assist. We have trailers, adaptations, accessories, and so on. And we do sales, spot hire, rental, and lease. And we've got trade accounts with all the main brands, and we really know our way around them because we actually use them and we repair them. One thing I'd focus on in here, because I'm being asked about what are the obstacles to businesses using cargo bikes, and one of them is finance. So we've now got a third-party commercial loan company involved who are themselves very interested in green businesses and in cycling, and they're doing very well as well. So here we have some of our trailers. We're out there doing the business. Obviously, there's also travel to work by bike and staff pool bikes. And we're involved with various salary sacrifice schemes that enable people to use the Cycle to Work scheme to get a bike. We go to employers and provide pop-up workshops doing bike maintenance, repairs. They're usually completely oversubscribed. And we do offer a full-on turnkey pool bike service with regular service and breakdown cover to employers who want it. So that's us, and we're really interested in working with anybody who thinks they may even just might have an opportunity for using a bike in their business.
Brilliant. Richard, thank you very much. Okay, so let's get to some questions. We've got roughly 4 pre-prepared, and I'm going to direct, we've already got these in, I'm going to direct them to each of our panelists, and then we're going to open it up and see the several comments building up in the chat. But to kick off, and I'm going to put this one to Jessica first. So, I mean, we talked about, if you like, clientele, but do you expect to see any impact on workforces from increasing levels of walking and cycling? I'm thinking in the areas of financial upside to the business, or maybe sustainability targets that people have pledged to.
Yeah, thanks for that question. I mean, I think this is at many levels. So what we are seeing, where there's a growing kind of awareness around climate change and climate change action, and businesses wanting to take action. And what's been really pleasing about the pandemic is that we haven't seen that decrease, we've seen it increase. So during the financial crash, 10, 12 years ago, what we saw was climate change awareness, thinking about sustainability falling off a cliff, whereas right now we're in a very different moment in time. And that's driven by a number of factors. It's driven by consumer demand and by the people who are working in businesses in our spaces. They're demanding that their businesses are more sustainable. They're wanting to work for businesses that are that have high levels of climate change ambition, and we're seeing that drives change within business. If they want to attract the talent that they can into their business, they're responding to that. We're also seeing health and well-being benefits, and we see it amongst our own staff who are regularly cycling and walking and are active, and can incorporate that sort of health and fitness activity and movement into their commutes to work. So they're not having to have it as an add-on to their day. It can be much more incorporated into how they get to work. But also you see it tripping over into things like walking meetings, excuse the pun, I suppose, but people wanting to take to think more creatively about how you meet someone, how you interact, how you get the best out of your time. So we are seeing that as a real benefit, and we see that in terms of time off with reduced levels of sickness as part of a package of wellbeing activity. And we also think that it adds, and I think it came up in one of the presentations, that sort of consistency to your commute. You can be really flexible about when you travel, but you also know how long you're going to be traveling for. And we see multiple examples of people having quicker journey times by having a combination of walking and cycling rather than being sat in the car, or even taking trams in many cases, particularly in a quite tight city centre where you've got a dense core to it. So I think there are sort of multiple benefits. What we also see is that businesses are prepared to pay more to have good quality spaces. We're not sort of it costs money to transfer space across from office space into shower space or locker space, and to provide cycle parking, but there's a premium that gets attached to that, and businesses are prepared to pay, and they're prepared to pay because their staff want it, and it means they can keep the best staff in their business and keep people happy. So there's a number of layers, but I think a lot of this tracks back to this shift in the intensity to which people think about climate change and sustainability overall, and want to incorporate that into their lives.
You touched on a lot there, and there's a lot of nodding going on. So things like walking meetings, and you sort of laughed when you said that, and I know why. But I bet you could ask anybody who's on this call, when did you come up with your best ideas? And I can bet you that it wasn't sitting at the desk. And then we all go, oh yeah, nod. And then we carry on sitting at the desk. And in terms of journey reliability, everyone goes, oh yeah, of course. And their messages at that moment that are just slipping by like Teflon, and they're not being heard. And I think they're things that we absolutely need to bring out. If you were going to give, if you were going to just come up with like one tip, really, one thing that you'd say, right, if you change one thing with,
I think that question is going to be,
pardon?
one thing that, sorry, you slightly broke up there, Chris, for me. I'm guessing that you asked, what's the one thing that, the one major benefit, or the one
thing that you, a piece of advice you'd give to other businesses?
Yeah, I think it's ask your colleagues, and also be really flexible and creative about what you provide. So I love the description we've just had around bike hire, which gives loads of different options for people, and sort of recognise that people are at different stages of their journey. We've done some nice work during over the last year or two, where we encourage people to buddy up so that they can find their best journey into work, and that both increases the relationships people have in work, and also helps someone who might be a bit cycle timid to get on their bike and come into the workplace. So I think being really flexible and listening to your staff and help getting them to kind of come up with what it is that would make the difference.
Okay, Richard, you want to add something to that?
My understanding, Jessica, is that you have a director who rides a bike. And I wondered how much you think leadership takes.
Well, yeah, I mean, actually, I think that's a really good point. Our chief, I sort of almost dismissed it because it's so ubiquitous, but our chief executive cycles in quite regularly. He runs in a lot of the time, as do a number of our board members. I'm not sure. You know, we have a pretty active workforce, and partly because an awful lot of them are very young. But I think the leadership helps, but I don't think it's essential. But at least they understand what's required, and some of the challenges that come with cycling, and how to leave your kit bag next to your desk.
The leaders listening seems to be key, regardless of whether they participate or not. I think that was your main point there. Listen and be prepared to be flexible. I'm going to direct the next one at John, if that's okay. So I think around the country, it's quite a broad one that I'm going to go to John with, but around the country, it's often one of the biggest critical low traffic neighbourhoods, which is so often in the news at the moment, this sudden hatred of cul-de-sacs. Presumably it's due to perceived and not unreasonable perceived worries about customers. Is it going to drop off because we've reduced the amount of parking? So John, I mean, you've got, as you alluded to earlier, direct experience of having the traffic reduced right around your business. And I suppose to an extent that you've already answered it, you know, that what actually happened and what happened for your customers I mean, it's very difficult to gauge at the moment. Could you actually see that in hard numbers? Because it was a very different environment. What are you comparing it to? But if there were businesses on this call, which I really hope there are, since that's the focus, what would your advice be to them around worries over taking parking away and giving it over to space for people?
Well, I think inevitably in life, Chris, that change is concerning for people. People are resistant to change, and that's not stubbornness. It's just part of the human condition. Every time something changes, people are always petrified about maybe the unintended consequences of that change. But for me, this change is almost not something that needs to be discussed, as in, there are no downsides to this for me, because as a business owner, like I said, the reduced anxiety of people around my business was visible, and there was more people around the business, and you know, this fear of change probably is deep rooted in people's subconscious, that they don't need to be fearful of change. Embrace change, or even, you know, be architects of change yourself, and that's how we've developed as a human race, and it's deeply how we will develop, you know, going forward. And for, as a business owner, you know, what I do is challenge my staff and the people that work with me to think of changes and to be inspired by change rather than to be too scared of it. And I think it's a natural reaction for people to be worried, but as a business owner, Chris, there's no doubt in my mind there's no downside to this. We're in an age now of, you know, if you look at the consumers that come and spend the money with me, we're in an age of conscious consumerism. People want to know where what they're eating has come from. People want to know the provenance behind the things that you sell, and that drive, I think, which Jessica mentioned, this drive behind a green mentality and understanding, you know, the climate change piece is really powerful, and that drives maybe what we sell on site, but also drives how I view health and well-being for my staff. The fact that my staff can cycle from home and get to work safely and easily is an amazing benefit for me as a business owner. Two reasons. One is the commute, like you said, is so predictable. I think one thing anecdotally that I've found is staff are rarely late when they cycle. Staff that rely upon public transport or cars can often be late by no fault of their own. The people who cycle and walk are inevitably there when they say they are. And you know, that's a big benefit for me. But not only that, it's the health and well-being. Look, I've been a professional sportsman, like I said, for 16 years. I understand the value of exercise and what it can bring to your life. And I think, Chris, you mentioned, you know, those moments of clarity rarely come when you're in a crowded office or when you're in a crowded environment surrounded by others. My moments of clarity come when I'm walking my dogs in the middle of nowhere, when you're cycling into work. I cycle in from Macclesfield into the city. So, you know, those are the points where you've got nothing else but your own thoughts. And I think that's really valuable, that we all get away from technology and get away from everything and use these moments of your commute, walking, cycling, to really allow your thoughts space to breathe.
On a really mundane bit though, just a supplemental question. So because you have specifically had you know, a pedestrianised area, you have the traffic reduced around your business. What about things like deliveries? How have you dealt with that? Because that's one of the big fears that we often hear about.
Well, like you said, I think joined up thinking has been used, and what we need to do is, when I think these restrictions or changes are made to routes, that there's an open and honest dialogue, not just with you know, maybe transport providers, taxi firms, the council, but then also I think there is an extended piece where suppliers and frequent deliveries into the city can be brought into that communication. And has it been easy, Chris? No, I think we've had to adapt. But like I said, with change, people adapt, right? So what our fruit and veg suppliers, it didn't take them long to realise that they couldn't get down that street. So it's, you know, it's really interesting, you know, how quickly they adapted. And certainly for me, it didn't take long. It was a very short period of time for them to adapt. And ultimately, they're a logistics firm. That's what they need to be able to do. Roads close all the time. Things change. If they're stubbornly going to drive down a street that's no longer open, they're going to be out of business pretty soon, right? So, yeah, you know, it was a challenge at first, but it was really quickly solved.
So it's a question of, basically, once you're faced with the change, as we were last year, we weren't asked, do you want a pandemic? You know, yeah, this has happened to you. You have to cope with it. How incredibly good we are at adapting. You know, it's one of the probably better human traits, I'm afraid. Okay, I'm going to move it on. I've got two more questions before we open up the floor. So the next one really is for Richard. So what potential, I mean, you've told us a bit about your business. We know about it. It's been around a long time. It feels like this is your moment. So, you know, the growth of cargo by logistics now has got to be absolutely huge. Do you see it being a big part of Manchester's future? Where do you see the biggest barriers to that growth?
Thank you. It's safe to say that in the last 24 months, it's just taken off. So fantastic. But what are the barriers is a really interesting question. So the doors and opportunities are fantastic, but will we get there is the question. For instance, we think that 1 in 2 light commercial vans, that's 3.5 tons or lower, could be replaced with cargo bikes. Now, this isn't a figure plucked out of the air. This is based on solid evidence, which I'm perfectly happy to supply to anybody. Across mainland Europe and the UK, there were 2 million light commercial vans delivered the year before last, 2019. 96% of them were diesel engined. So we're actually aiming across Europe, because I'm a member of the European Cyclogistics Federation, of course, we're aiming for 50% of them to be cargo bike sales by 2030. And we actually think, looking at that in reverse, that in order to meet the climate change carbon reduction targets that have been put out there, and you'll have seen that Boris Johnson has just increased ours to 68% of 1990 levels just before Christmas, we are going to have to do that. So it's coming at it 2 ways. It's not just that we think it's possible, but we actually think it's the only realistic way that greening that element of the light commercial van market is essential. And then the second bit is that I think cycling has a little bit of people have a bit of strange views about cycling who perhaps have never thought about it as part of business. For instance, cycling is cheap. Well, actually, do you know what? A cargo bike, you can easily spend $5 grand on a good cargo bike. And some people go, huh? They can't cope with it. Of course, they've never also done, by and large, the maths about how much it costs to buy that light commercial van. So actually, mile for mile, we do fine on costs. We do absolutely fine. But we do need to get people to the point where they realize that. Well, and so the final bit, obstacle, is the lack of experience and knowledge, which is why I just plead with everybody, don't bother talking, don't bother writing reports, come and have a go on a cargo bike, and then we'll talk.
I think that's an excellent point, because what you just described is fear of change, fear of different. And we talk about cargo bikes, and even me, I watch it now and it looks like a novelty. And you go, it isn't a novelty, it works, here's all the evidence. And I'm looking and going, yeah, but it's a novelty, isn't it? and that's what we need to get out of. And I think with all of these measures, I'm bunking in on your question here. I think with all of these measures, the one thing that is such a powerful tool, if we can use it, is try before you buy. So take away the fear by letting somebody try it without having to face that fear. Let them have a go, and I think that is key, and that's a service that in this particular area that you offer.
One thing I'd add is that we do need to get nuanced. We do need to deliberately get more complex about this, and that's not to confuse people, but to actually help them get the right result. So I can now, I'm not going to do it, don't worry right now, but I can now lay out to people different models of cargo bike, different ways of using them, different combinations, trailers, non-trailers, electric, non-electric, and so on, different price points. We can actually go across a spectrum now to meet different requirements. And that is part of us growing up in the cargo bike world, but it's also real life. People have very different requirements in their business. And we now are much more au fait with that. And I will end with, this week, we are delivering a cargo bike trailer to FM Conway in London. And FM Conway are a major construction logistics firm. So can you believe it? We've sold into the construction logistics industry. Brilliant. How about that?
Well, it's certainly a breakthrough. All right, the last of, thanks for that, Richard. A lot of food for thought. If you can hear me tapping in the background, by the way, that's me just making some notes here. So, Sarah, I think this is quite an interesting, a big question for me. It's one that Jessica and I have touched on in various other meetings that we've been involved in. To what extent, in fact, you already touched on it actually about land reuse in developments that you've been involved with. To what extent is cycling and walking considered routinely in housing projects, and what's the potential there for change? Because I'm heavily involved with roads, but then the roads stop at new developments. How do we ensure that it properly links up?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. Talk to us. That's the best thing we can do. Talk to developers, what they're doing, where they're doing it, when they're doing it, how can it link in? Because that's where it came out with Kersal Vale. It was that talk. We needed to know what was happening. We didn't know about the bike route coming in, and until we had that conversation, it wouldn't have happened. For us, we're a housing association, so we're not like a normal developer who builds the houses and then sells them. We have to look after these, and we want for the next 100 years. So we want to make sure that we're building community. So we do look at our developments slightly differently to a lot of developers. But that said, everybody, through planning, if it's more than, is it 10 houses, you have to do a design access statement. So they should be thinking about how is this scheme going to be accessible in the future as part of that, and that should be done right at the start whenever you're designing the site. So I know that within Great Places, our design guidance has accessibility as being the second thing we have to look at straight after the site, and what can we fit. And let's be frank, we have to fit as many homes as possible. We're all about building affordable homes. We must get as many units as possible onto that land, but then how can we use that effectively? In the past, we've done all sorts. We've done a bike shed at every garden, which some people was like, yay, fantastic. Others were like, why do I have this honking great shed? So it's trying to make sure we've got that balance of what is right. From our point of view, it's easiest for houses, apartment blocks, and this is going to sound awful, but the minute we ask people to share, it gets difficult. So we've built shared bike sheds, and that can be quite difficult because people will store their wheelbarrow in there, or the old sofa cushions. We find all sorts in our shared bike sheds, but it's the same management issue with our shared bin stores. Yeah, the minute you put the word shared in, it's like we go, I can put whatever I want in here. So people use it for anything. So it's not just to do with bike sheds, but it's also to do with any shared space. But I would say, so from our point of view, though, we want to build communities, and so those linkages. We do not want our customers to be trapped into car ownership. We're building affordable homes. If we're then forcing people to be trapped into car ownership for life, that's trapping them potentially into, is it transport poverty? There's a term for it, and I don't know what it is, but so that for us is really, really important. So it's all about the sites, the orientation, and how we can link. But I would say, planning. If we can get planning to uplift what we have to do, that would be quite handy as well. Get that stick coming in from developers at all sides.
Yeah. I think we forget that it's around 30% of Greater Manchester's population don't own a car, and yet they're bottom of the list. And a lot of them, it's not necessarily because of poverty, although money is the case for a lot of people. They can't afford it, but also people are more increasingly, it's a choice. And it's a choice that people don't want the burden, particularly the younger generation. I've got my children. A few are at driving age, only one of them has, because insurance when you kick off is £2,500, and I'd rather spend that on other things. So it's people of my age aren't seeing that the rite of passage for me, it's not the same for them, and yet we're still designing because it's people of my age that are doing the designing for a client that doesn't exist anymore. And I think that's a message that's not getting through. The shared space one, I think, is really interesting. I like that. Well, if there's no pressing comments, can't see hands up from any hands going up in our panel there, I'm going to move on and hand back to Rosalind, who's been collating the questions that have been coming up, and we'll take some of those from the floor. Yep. Rosalind.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. So I'm going to pick out the great questions. I'm going to pick out the ones that are most directly related to businesses and the ones that I feel that haven't quite been answered yet. We'll see how many we can get through. So we've got a question from Ben, which is that he says, I can see the benefits to some businesses of having less cars, but what about those that rely on people coming to their businesses by car, such as trades or furniture shops? So I wonder, Chris, if you've got an answer to that, or you or Richard. Rich is putting his hand
I
up.
didn't quite hear it, so hand it on to the others.
I think what I would say straight away, I'm afraid I can't quite juggle it to see who this was, whoever you are. I'm sorry about that. Ben, is it? Sorry, thank you. We actually can quite successfully move items of furniture 5 to 10 miles around an IKEA without any trouble by bike, if that's what's wanted. Then, of course, there's home deliveries. So you can go by bike to the shop, choose what you want, and then the company delivers for you. So actually, the need for the car to those is greatly reduced these days because the options for doing it differently are there. And I think that this is all about habits and change, as John Wilkin so eloquently said earlier. We just need to get on it and get tackling it. It is true, however, that seeing as I'm on IKEA, that they did actually at one time equip their stores with cargo bikes that you could borrow. But of course, the problem with that was that there was no induction on how to use a cargo bike. People didn't go there thinking, oh, I'll borrow a cargo bike when I'm there. You know, and it didn't really work very well. So it does need a better form of organising.
Great, thank you. I've got a question here from Harry, which is saying, is there a risk of eliting cycling for commuting if we're talking about shower facilities? For so many people's commutes, a city bike in their work clothes would be fine, particularly if it's an e-bike. We just always see people commuting on hybrids or road bikes in sports clothing and think that's how it has to be. So that's a question to Jessica.
Yeah, I mean, I really don't think the answer is not to provide showers. And how could you, I think there is a question about how we can normalise cycling so people can cycle in their normal clothes, that's not seen as an elitist activity. Of course, that's right. But I don't think the answer is take out the showers and people will cycle differently. I think we need to encourage a culture where you can cycle in a less sweaty way, I suppose. I must say, I think there will always be a spectrum in this space, and I think that we don't see very much sort of gentle cycling, if you like, wearing work clothes, which you see in other countries, and I think there's a big question for us about how we encourage more of that. But I think that removing showers would be a very odd response to that, not least because they're useful for other things too. So sorry, Harry, I agree with your analysis, but I disagree with the solution, if that's what you were suggesting the solution was.
Thanks, Jessica and Sarah.
Yeah, so just from our experience of people cycling to work, we have a mixture of people, some who cycle in their clothes, who maybe only cycled a mile, or like me, I do not cycle fast, so I can wear my normal clothes, hop off and I'm there. But we've made sure that we do have the showers there as well for people. So we've got people who cycle in from Macclesfield. I'm thinking that to me is a day trip, but that to them is their commute. So we have the showers there accessible. The thing that we probably underestimated, and I would recommend as a top tip, is the locker space. So we moved into a new office. We put in lockers, which I thought would be plenty. Nowhere near enough. So whatever you're specifying for lockers, put in double. That's my top tip. So yeah, but with regards to showers and things, it's making sure the facilities are there for the people who need it. And yeah, and then the ones who don't need it won't use it.
Thanks, Sarah. And Chris, so you got your hand up.
Yeah, I would just add, because this is what I do. I gave up my car well over a year ago now. So it hasn't been a brilliant test for a big chunk of that time. But I live in a place that I've got 2 stations that I can go to, half an hour in each direction. And I ride there. And I'm very lucky because I use Merseyrail, which ironically is the most reliable service in the country, believe it or not. And then it bumps into Liverpool and then it gets a bit squirrely. But we have great cages at every station. I have a fob, I lock my bike up. But I ride there half an hour, keep a bike in Manchester, I ride between meetings, and I do it dressed as I am now. So I think Jessica's point is excellent, that you take away as many barriers as you can. So people feel that, oh, I need to get a shower, I need to get changed, and I want the option to do that. Then why not provide it? It helps. And I think you'll find over time that people get comfortable just moving around in normal clothes, doing normal things, but they need to make that journey for themselves, metaphorically as well as literally. And I think that's, it is something that happens. We know it happens all over the continent. Now people just go dressed for the destination, not the journey, but we're not there yet. So it's part of a cultural change. You won't necessarily jump from one to the other. Let people get there and find things out for themselves.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Chris. And yeah, from my point of view, I would never wear lycra when I'm cycling to work. Just cycle in my office clothes and then glow throughout the day. So yeah, it can be done, and that's the same for all the people in our Sustrans office in offices in Manchester and Leeds. It's the same. We don't have the luxury of showers, sadly, but I think the more businesses that are demanding showers, and the more that businesses and commercial properties are offering showers, then the better. So the next question is perhaps more of a general one. So it's about, why do you think behaviours, and this one's from Amy, why do you think behaviours around cycling are different here to places like the Netherlands, what we wear to commute, and the types of cycles we ride here for those commuter journeys? Chris, is that one a good one for you? I know you think a lot about the difference between Greater Manchester and the Netherlands, and why cycling is behaviour around cycling is different.
Rosalind, can I come in?
Oh, sorry, Richard, go on. Yeah.
I think the first thing to say is that there's a lot of perhaps a misconception anyway about what happens about cycling in the Netherlands. You have to remember that in the late 60s into the early 70s, they were losing cycling as a culture very rapidly. And it was only in the early 70s they had a big national argument, led, it has to be said, by parents, mainly women, with banners that said, your car is killing my child, and kind of calm little things like that. And they had a big debate and decided that actually they wanted to keep cycling, and then they've done the rest. So what I'm saying is, I think there's a misconception that cycling is automatically fine in the Netherlands. They still have road rage incidents. They still have loads of people on the motorways in queues. So, you know, they have their own share of issues. And I think partly it's about making the space and time for the right culture to arrive for cycling, which I hope most of us around this call today are trying to do. I really think that it will happen, and it will take time. And we have, in the meantime, got to try. It's not always possible to keep our own sense of humor when we're out there.
Oh, that was me muting. Any other panelists wanting to come in on that question? Oh, John, yes, thanks.
Yeah, I think interesting when you talk about what, you know, some of the barriers for cycling in Manchester. Obviously, the weather's always used, isn't it, as a reason to why people wouldn't commute and cycle into work. And as I said, I spent 2 years in Toronto. Now Toronto is -30 in winter, and it's +30 in summer. It's got the most extremes of weather conditions. But one of the things that I found that really opens up people's accessibility to commute were the free bikes, the city bikes that are around on the streets. And even that as a symbol, for me, then led people to believe that cycling is an option. And seeing cycle racks, seeing bikes, you know, the facilities to park bikes in the city was a real instigator in my mind that I could use the bikes to get to work. So I used to cycle maybe 4.5 miles through the downtown of Toronto from the east to the west on a the busiest street you could imagine. There was a cycle lane, there was constant points to drop the bikes off. So there needs to be just a real investment in the facilities. And then the barriers like weather and showers and all of these things, I think, will take care of themselves due to the driving demand for people to actually want to cycle.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And actually what we find is that the biggest barrier to people cycling is that they don't feel safe, and that's why we need to work really hard to make our streets safer for people. So that's the end of our time and the end of our, well, not quite the end of our questions. What we'll aim to do is if you've put a question in the chat, we'll try and get back to you directly. I know there's been some exchange of email addresses in the chat, so that's great. So thank you so much, especially to Chris for chairing our panel, and to all our participants, to Sarah, Jessica, John and Richard. It's been a really interesting discussion. Thank you. And thanks to everybody who's attended for your engagement. And thanks to TFGM for supporting the production of Bike Life reports and for supporting this event. Thank you very much, everyone. Goodbye.
Thanks a lot.
Goodbye.